Embrace the spirit of adventure as you join us on this daring journey through the untamed wilderness of Let's Find Out with Diego. Bonus Overdrive Wednesday.
It's time to find out with Diego. Let's go. Ooh, yeah.
On this episode of Bonus Overdrive Wednesday, since 1978, our guest is known worldwide as a Beatles superfan, promoter, and historian. He's the author of the book of Top 10 Beatles Lists. We will cover the memories, insights, and mysteries about this musical force of nature that has yet to be duplicated. We're going to get into this right here, right now. Please welcome a good friend to our show, Beatles superfan and promoter Charles Rosenay. Charles, my friend, welcome to Bonus Overdrive Wednesday, brother.
I am so psyched to be here. And we're not talking scary stuff. We're not talking spooky. We're not talking paranormal or horror or ghosts or monsters. We're talking about the Beatles. This is amazing.
Yes, and in a sense, I mean, we're not talking paranormal. They're kind of like a supernatural force in the music industry, because what a powerhouse these four guys. And we're going to get into that because there's so much to cover. I mean, we're still talking about the Beatles now. It is 2025. And when did the Beatles first make their debut? I know they were in England, but in America.
Well, believe it or not, I always say it's my first memory in life. It was seeing the Beatles on this Sunday night CBS variety hour called The Ed Sullivan Show. And I was a little kid. I don't know how, 3, 4, or 5. And it just left such indelible mark on me. It just blew me away. I wanted to be a Beatle. I wanted to grow up, to rock and roll and become that part of my life. Unfortunately, I wasn't musically inclined. I couldn't play an instrument, and my singing was not the best. So what did I do? I went into other fields. I became, a DJ, doing party DJ at clubs and weddings and bar mitzvahs and school dances and all that good stuff. I started producing Beatle conventions when I was still in college, started doing tours to Liverpool for Beatle fans in 1983, and published a magazine on the Beatles for 20 years. And that was all, just stuff that I, wasn't even my main job, but I loved doing it. And it became a lifelong, like side hustle, if I can use that word, in the most, non-offensive way.
And it's funny you mentioned I can't sing worth a lick. I have no musical talent. And so I had to direct my passion to something different. So that's why I got into wrestling. And I borrowed, because my scene at that time, I grew up with the Headbangers Ball, heavy metal scene, and late 70s hard rock and 80s.
Yes.
And I borrowed a lot of those elements that influenced me, not only in wrestling, but also on the podcast as well. Because I used to also, when I was younger, I did a fanzine. I covered a lot of underground metal bands. It's one of those things, you really like something, you just go for it. And then you get to meet all these great bands or even super fans as well. Now, going back to the time you're talking about, it was the Ed Sullivan Show you mentioned, right?
Yes.
And he was kind of for his time, a little bit square in a way, but he was kind of funny. But
he was square and cool at the same time. He was square the way he presented himself, and he was, really establishment and older. But look at the acts he had, from Elvis to the Beatles to the Dave Clark Five, you name it, the Rolling Stones. He was cool enough to know when he had a great act to book.
He did. I don't think anybody had a great booking with celebrities or musical talents like he did. Now, talking about that, because at that time, there was a lot of things going on in that country as far as the music industry.
Yes.
Things were changing, some new things, some old things still carried over. Now the Beatles, very simple songwriting, but at the same time, it got to the point. It was very catchy. They were good boys, but at that time, they had the, what used to call me back then, their hair were a little bit shaggy. So I think at that time, it's kind of the more controversial things about them, at least in that time.
Yeah, that's fair. To us looking back in retrospect, oh my gosh, big deal, right? They had Beatle cuts, or what do we call them now? Bowl cuts. What's his name? Mo from the Three Stooges had the same hairstyle, but it was so revelationary at the time that they looked so different than your buzz cut typical American person of that age, so that it was like, oh, is this dangerous? Is this shocking? And until they hit American shores and did press conferences which showed that they were not just human but funny and had such great personality and were cheeky and weren't afraid to be a little sarcastic. This was a breath of fresh air coming out of an era that gave us Frankie Avalon and Fabian and Pat Boone and all these middle of the road Lily Whitebread type acts. So they were a real breath of fresh air and a real shock to a generation who probably wasn't as ready as the younger generation was.
No, and let's go before we debate your debut in the United States.
Yeah,
going back to England, and when this band formed, was this an organic forming of the band? Because I asked because I don't know, and if you're subscribed to this thought process, and I believe it was in the 90s or late 80s when, I'm not calling them a boy band, don't kill me, but when they have boy bands, and a lot of these bands were kind of put together by producers or by promoters and trying to make a magic formula. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't.
Yes.
And the reason I asked this is because these guys are the most four perfect guys, kind of like Kiss in the 70s. No more perfect guys than Peter Ace, and then you had Gene, and you had
Paul. Yeah, that's such a great question, because the first of the bands that were put together as a boy band and really were amazing successes was the Monkees, and those were made. That band was made in the image of the Beatles, but the Beatles was so organic, it's not even funny. Here's middle class guys, maybe lower middle class, all from the same area, Liverpool, England. So we're not talking about four of the greatest talents, one from America, one from Russia, one from England, one from Japan. We're talking about four guys who were a bus ride away from each other or walking distance, getting together, originally with Pete Best, a different drummer, but then eventually Ringo. And I gotta tell you, I think the stars aligned perfectly at that time, because they were the right mix of personalities, the right mix of music. And people always said, what is it about the Beatles? And I would say it's the 3 M's. It's the music. For someone who lived through it, like myself or your mom, it was the memories, whether it was yourself or your parents or an older sibling who passed it down. That was the second M. But the third M, that's the X factor, the magic. Why? And it was all the things. It was their songwriting. It was their personality. It was their humor. It was the hair. It was the way they stood on stage. But now, having said that, and you asked about were they put together a la the Monkees or One Direction or New Kids or even any of those bands who came out of the American Idol generation, they got their chops before they were famous by playing clubs 365 nights a week and really, really paying their dues, which no acts really do anymore. And what they did was they went to Hamburg, Germany, where they had to play 5-6 hours a night. And it wasn't just playing songs. It was like entertaining the raucous crowd. They would yell "Mach show," which means "Mach show," which means make show. Give us a show. So they would stomp on their feet. They try to jump it down, break the stage. They'd come out wearing toilet seats on their head. They would do anything to be a little different. And in being different, they learned how to be funny and they learned how to work a crowd. So it was in Hamburg, Germany, before they returned to Liverpool and before, of course, the British invasion hit America. That's really when they became a band, and it was all organic and all within themselves.
Yes, and then I right across the seas into the United States. At that point, they were already megastars. Yeah. And back then, there was no internet, no social media. There was some magazines, maybe some newspaper articles.
Yes.
But they came here, and I'll say this, that I've never seen, I mean, in my times, I guess, Michael Jackson, but even surpasses that, because nobody was getting the reactions from the crowd, especially the ladies, like, like Elvis, but then the Beatles came in.
Right.
I think it took some of that attention away. It's like, where did this come from? Were they already headliners when they came to the States, or were they opening for anybody?
They weren't even really known when they came to the States, aside from like music aficionados, people who listen maybe to AM radio, if some of the stations were playing it. Maybe they caught a glimpse of them on the Jack Parr show, or Walter Cronkite mentioned them. They were just mentioned in passing, but there was no media awareness. We didn't have YouTube, you didn't have TikTok. There's no way you would have really known about them aside from the promo that hit saying the Beatles are coming, and you had to watch them on Ed Sullivan. So they did their first concert that same time in February of 1964, and by then the world discovered them, America discovered them, and they were selling out. But prior to that, even a few months before that, they were opening for other acts, opening for Little Richard, for Roy Orbison, for other of the 50s and 60s acts who were hot at the time. But once they hit Ed Sullivan, once their songs, and we think, what were they simple, the songs? Yeah, but so is A B C D E F. So is that. So is Doe a Deer. Simple doesn't mean simplistic. Simple means it's great choruses, it's catchy tunes, and it's short and it's memorable, and they're all different. They didn't all sound the same. You mentioned Michael Jackson, who none of his songs really one sounded exactly like the other. Maybe it was stylistically similar. Maybe when you put it on, you say, oh yeah, it's definitely Michael Jackson. Oh, this is definitely a Bruno Mars song. This is definitely, you knew it was a Beatles song. But every single song had its own personality and had its own difference. And really, really, even looking back now from the time they started with the She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand, right on through, Come Together and Helter Skelter, more of the heavy stuff, it was a progression, and it was always different songs, always different sounds, always experimental. Nowadays, if you and I put a band together with the best musicians on the planet and had the best material, we would not have anything new to do. There's nothing new anymore. Everything's been done, and 99% of it was done by the Beatles.
Yes, and on a real quick side story, when I got into wrestling a long time ago, and did a lot of these road trips, I had a friend. He told me, by the time you get into wrestling and by the time you're over, you're going to start getting into some stuff you didn't think about, like music. You're going to start listening to country music. I say, you're out of your damn mind. Once a metalhead, always a metalhead. I'll die, and whatever. It's ridiculous at this point. Yeah. But I started rediscovering music from that era, even before that, because you talk about Little Richard.
Yeah,
and that dude had a lot of attitude. His songs were always on fire. You start listening to other similar acts, even before that, like a Moon Mullican, who was just a normal guy playing music, and you fast forward down the road, you start seeing a lot of this more modern music as it progresses. You're like, they really borrowed a lot of stuff from those musicians back in the day, and they just put a little twist to it and made it their own.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point, because even Motown stuff, they covered the Marvelettes' Please Mr. Postman. They covered Smokey Robinson's You Really Got a Hold on Me. They were very, very, very big fans of the R&B of the time, and they were able to find a way to put a twist on it and, make it their own sounding, to the point where people had to rediscover the originals, because the originals weren't really hits. It was the Beatles versions of them that the people knew better. Twist and Shout is the best example. That was originally done by the Isley Brothers. Shake it up, baby. And it was very, R&B, and it was just a good song. But when the Beatles did it, it was beyond good. It was a classic. Yeah, so great point.
Yeah, and with their performances, because I'm talking about the early clean-cut days, as I think that was the times when my mother was listening to it.
Yeah,
where on the records they sound great, is beautifully produced even at that time.
Yes,
but their live performances is so different. They were like a I would consider them almost like a more of a hard rock band, because the energy was there.
Yeah, energy is a good point of it. That's great point using the word energy, because you can't bottle energy. You can't teach energy. You can't. I've used the word personality like 3 or 4 times already. You can teach someone how to play an instrument. You can teach a DJ how to press buttons. You can teach a baseball player how to swing. But if they don't have that extra something, if they don't have that oomph, the energy, and that makes a big difference. The Beatles always had energy, and you could see it in their old like rare footage where you see them playing live. Even they're standing still, there's their energy that's come forward. They were 3D. You watch them on TV, and even if it's in black and white, for some reason it's like comes outside of the TV and outside of the camera and outside the screen. And I just get psyched just thinking about him and talking about him.
No, definitely I can tell because there are some subjects that I'm very passionate about. You can definitely tell. Now, we're going to get into this book here in a moment because very interesting. So I think I'm going to buy my mother a copy of this. She's going to go crazy. I'm telling you, brother. And so when you first started doing these events, you're talking about, what was it? What year was the first event that you did? Was it back in the 70s?
Yeah, first one I ever did when I was still in school, 1978. I was I think a freshman in college, but yeah, that was the first one.
And with that, so how did that come? Because I think at that time, like I said earlier, we didn't have the benefit of
yeah.
I think
we didn't have the internet. No, we didn't have emails, so it was a challenge getting word out. I have to take ads in newspapers. I'd have to go to colleges and hang out flyers. It was all legwork, and it came about because I was an intern at a theater. And the theater said, "Hey, can you think of any really great events we should have?" And I knew there were Beatle conventions in New York and in Boston, and I was right in the middle. I was in New Haven, Connecticut. I said, "Well, we can do a Beatles convention," not knowing that they're going to laugh at me or whatever. They okay, let's do it. And the theater closed. So here I am with a name Liverpool Productions, with a thought of the first annual New England Beatles convention, with a band. Reaching out to vendors. I'm like, trying to get word out and trying to have an event, and the venue closes. So I move it to this little hotel, and it bombed. I'll be honest, Diego. It was like, oops, it was like you put your whole life into making a movie, and then 12 people see it. Less than 100 people came each day, and I was like, oh man, I spent so much in advertising, and I'm still a kid in a way, and I'm thinking, I don't know what. And the next year, where I had where I was going to college, I became part of the college union, the student union, the activities board. I said, hey, maybe I could bring my event here. And they loved the idea. So I produced it on campus, and it doubled because here I had, half the students came. In those days, the Beatles were still, viable. They were alive. It was always a chance they were going to get together. So you do a Beatles convention in a college now, oh, great, maybe one student might come and a few professors. But in those days, the students were still young enough to really love the Beatles, and all of them loved it. Where nowadays, the new generation, if they're astute enough, they appreciate it. The grandkids, yeah, they come if the parents and the grandparents, played the music and taught them well. But in those days, moving it to the college made a big difference, and I did it there for a few years, and then it just began to grow, and it became I was doing them in Miami, in Seattle, in Cleveland. I did conventions in Columbus, Ohio, in upstate New York, in Seattle. I did the first Beatles convention in Tokyo because not that I was great at it, but there weren't a lot of us around, and I was the most accessible. So if someone wanted to do a Beatles convention in their town, in Detroit or whatever, they would look me up, they'd find me, and I'd come out and I'd get them the guests, I'd get them the bands, I'd get them the vendors. So I became not just a convention producer, but a convention, the guy who people go to who want to put on conventions, the consultant and the executive producer or the associate producer of other shows. Then that just built and blossomed to the point where in 1984, when it was the 20th anniversary of the Beatles, and we had just lost John Lennon a few years before that, we did a show in Miami. It was the first one ever done in a mall, and it was the first one ever done free admission, and we drew over 50,000 people. And so, yeah, I kind of made my mark then and just continued to run with it.
And you mentioned it earlier in Japan. You went from having less than 100 people coming in throughout the whole time there on your
Yeah.
first show,
Yeah.
and then your reach went all the way to Japan.
Within a
How
few
were
years.
you approached? Yeah, how did you get approached by that?
Well, so, I guess I equate myself to the Beatles. They started small and they exploded.
Mhm.
Well, I'll tell you what happened was I started a Beatles magazine. It was called Good Day Sunshine, and it ran for like 20 years. But the plus about it, the great thing about it was when you're a recognized author or publisher or editor, well, all of a sudden you're listed in these periodicals. So there was no internet yet, again, but if you were, I don't know what, channel ABC News, and you were doing a story on the Beatles, well, you're looking for resources. I was a resource. So they would find me and they would interview me a lot. So now all of a sudden I've been quoted in the New York Times. I'm quoted in USA Today. I'm quoted in the LA Times. And it's Charles Rosenay, Beatles authority. Charles Rosenay, Beatles superfan. Charles Rosenay, Beatles producer. Well, if you're then now a producer, in Hong Kong or somewhere else, and you see, oh, Charles Rosenay, he's a Beatles producer, and there's a way to find me, and that's what they would do. So that really helped, publishing the magazine and being the reference person for the go-to for the media. Then I became a go-to for producers and everything else, and that's pretty much how. Japan was unbelievable. I'll tell you, I loved it there. I went there like 6 times. I lived there for a little while. I was managing a band, and we toured there. I think that that first one was just so unbelievable because we brought a Beatles band from the U.S., we brought a Beatles band from Liverpool, and we brought a special guest. And I was considered a guest too, just because I did the conventions here in the States. So great memories. I have just such really great memories of taking conventions to Japan and being part of that whole renaissance of Beatle mania in that country, where it still flourishes.
And now that you became, I'm going to call it a worldwide force and producing Beatles shows and these conventions,
Yes.
eventually you've had to been on somebody's radar, at least directly involved with the Beatles somehow. Were you approached by anybody there? Now, did anybody say, "Now you have to quit this because of XYZ," or "We love what you're doing. This person wants to come meet you"?
Great question. No one asks me that. I love that you did. So there was a time when I was doing the conventions and I was approached, not with a cease and desist, but I was taught that I can't ever use the Beatles logo with the drop T. You know how that famous logo is on any of my stuff. I call my event the Fab 4 Music Festival instead of Beatles Expo or the proper word Beatles. When I do anything, it's with Beatles artwork, not with the actual photos of the Beatles themselves. And that's interesting because I also helped a lot of Beatle tribute bands in the day, and they had that same issue. And once we eliminated the Beatles logo and don't call yourselves John, Paul, George, and Ringo on stage unless you're licensed, it cleared the way. So that was early on. But I met all the guys except John Lennon, and when I met him, Paul was introduced as the guy who publishes a magazine on the Beatles, the guy who does the Beatle tours, the guy who does all these conventions. And he's like, yeah, it's cool, whatever. He didn't really. That's great. He has enough fish to fry that he didn't really go crazy and gaga over, hey, let's call the authorities, let's get Apple on him. They don't care, as long as it's not infringement, and it's never been infringement, then they're cool with it. And I've had only really positive stuff with the guys.
No, so which one did you meet first, and what was that first feeling you got once you actually got to shake hands with them?
Well, I'll give you a precursor to that, because I never thought I would ever meet a Beatle. That wasn't even ever on my radar. I never in a billion years thought it would ever happen. In 1986, I met the Monkees, and they were my second favorite of all time. And I think I referenced them a little earlier. And I thought, all right, that's it. That's my pinnacle of, contact with fame. Maybe yours might be Hulk Hogan, might be, it might have been Andre the Giant if he was still alive. For me, it was always the Beatles, but I never thought they were attainable. So I always prayed I would someday meet the Monkees. I met the Monkees. I thought that's great. Well, then, just 4 years later, I met Paul McCartney in England and in Birmingham, England. And it was just unbelievable. And I got pictures with him. I met him a bunch of times thereafter. And I was actually closer with his wife, Linda McCartney, who would always remember, oh, yeah, you're Charles from Connecticut. I'm Scarsdale. And you were born in the Bronx, which is in between. She would remember that. And it made me feel so good. So that was good. And as the years went on, I became really close with Pete Best, who was the drummer before Ringo. So, I'm very blessed that way. When you get to meet your heroes and then, they're cool. And then in some cases you become friends with them. That's beyond, I'm just so blessed. Yesterday, I attended the wedding of the rock star, Tommy James from Tommy James and the Shondells. Here she come now saying, Monet, Monet,
Yeah.
I think we're alone now. Crimson and Clover, Hanky Panky, big guy in the 60s and 70s and still tours. And he's a great guy. I attended his wedding. I mean, that's, you've arrived when you go to the weddings of these people, or if they call you on the phone and they're asking you, hey, when's the next convention? I want to be a guest. Or, hey, I just found something. Is it worth, what's it worth? They'll ask me, what things are worth. So, yeah, it's pretty cool, to be this regular guy who's a fan. And well, what happened just since COVID, and this is something I just love, is for years I was the guy who would go to a convention, shake hands with the star, whether it's an actor or a wrestler or a horror person or a musician, try to get a picture with them, try to get their autograph. But now I go to these shows or produce them and I sit behind the table and I'm able to sign my own books. And it's such a great feeling. I wish it on everyone else out there. There's nothing as cool as sitting behind a convention table and someone coming up, oh, I saw your book on the internet. Can I buy a copy and will you sign it for me? Yeah, that's what I'm here for. And can we take a picture? Yeah. Do we charge for the picture? No, come on, let's take a picture. Yeah, I love that.
And from conventions, as if you didn't hate yourself enough, you decided to write a book. And I mean that in a fun way because
no,
same thing with me. It's like,
and you gotta be a bit of a masochist, right?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Well, you mentioned that you used to do a heavy metal fanzine, right? I used to do the Beatles magazine, Good Day Sunshine, for 20 years. And when that had its run, I said, that's it. I will never publish anything again. It took so much out of me. And it was, it's worthwhile. And you have a lot of pride when the issues come out, but it was never ending. And you want to do it right. And it's just so taxing. But then COVID hit. And okay, I'm a DJ, right? I DJ at parties. Well, I ain't DJing no parties. It's COVID. No one's going out. I was booking bands, no booking bands. Doing conventions, no conventions. Music festivals, no music festivals. What else? Doing the tours. I do the Beatle tours to Liverpool, the Dracula tours to Transylvania. Nada, nothing. Gornish, no more tours. So what do? I'm on the treadmill midnight thinking of what I can do. The kids are asleep. We've watched 1 or 2 horror movies. And I'm thinking, I gotta come up with something. And that's why I decided I would put out books. And the first one was the book of top 10 horror lists, which you know about, where 100 celebrities who I come in contact with, so I'm friends with a lot of them, gave me their top 10 favorite horror lists. And I put in 9 chapters that were related to the Beatles. And I thought, okay, I got a list from the Beatles drummer Pete Best, John Lennon's sister. That should be good enough for my Beatle fans. And it wasn't. They're like, how dare you, Charles, put out a horror book before a Beatles book? I'm like, well, you know what? That's got to be then the next book. And what I did is I kept with the same formula. I interviewed or, emailed or spoke on the phone 64 celebrities, because of that magic number 64 with the Beatles, and put out the book of top 10 Beatles lists. And people who who got the horror book said, oh, we got to get the Beatles book now, because people who love top 10 lists love the book. People who love celebrities because they want to hear what their thoughts are love the book. And if you love music and if you love the other genres, then the book is just such a fun read.
And in a way, it's a smart thing with these top 10 lists, because it gives a fan or a reader, or let's say a celebrity that had their top 10. It kind of makes them connect better with that celebrity because
Yeah.
they love that song too. So do I. Here's why I love it, and I think you're onto something here with this top 10 thing.
Well, I do a lot of library appearances where, I present my life story, I talk about the books, and how do I connect the audience then with my book? Well, I'll go around the room and I'll say, Diego the podcaster, what's your favorite Beatles song? And you say,
Rain.
and I'll look in my book and I'll look at the index and I'll say, oh, wow, what, Rain? Well, that's also the favorite song of Leo Sayer, who was a big hit maker in the 70s. Oh, it was the favorite song of Cousin Brucey, who was, a famous DJ and still is. It was connected to the Beatles. Oh, wait, it's John Lennon's sister's favorite song. And so the audience going around the room, usually everyone has a different song. Someone says, oh, he picked my song. Someone says, I have too many favorite songs, whatever. That's the fun of it, is seeing which celebrities either picked your favorite song. Well, wasn't necessarily a song. Some did albums. Some celebrities did their favorite solo artists. Some did their favorite concerts. Some did their favorite memories. Some did their favorite places to visit in Liverpool. So I left that open-ended, as I did in the horror book. It wasn't just horror movies. Here it's not just Beatles songs. So it's really fun to read and to get the opinions of people, who we look up to. We want to know what they feel and what they love. And when it matches ours, well, then it makes it even better.
Yes, and I tell you, I do remember. I was going to lie to you, but I remember how I heard about that song because, as I mentioned, my mother had that mixtape, and that song was nowhere to appear on that mixtape. It happened because my mother also collected the vinyl.
Oh,
I have vinyls on my wall, these kind of things. So
yeah.
It was I think it was side B of a 45.
It was the side B of Paperback Writer. Very good, yes.
and I played that song to death. I beat it to death, brother.
Well, you know something? That Ringo says that's one of his favorite songs, and and everyone credits him for inventive drumming on that. There's voices talking backwards. They go Frere Jacques in reverse. And when I do my Beatle tours to Liverpool and London, we try to go to every possible place that the Beatles, either grew up at, recorded at, clubbed at, all that, their homes, all that stuff. And you think about, well, the most famous places would be Abbey Road, Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, the Cavern Club. One of the favorite places we go to is one of the first places we go in London is Chiswick Park, because the Beatles also revolutionized. They were MTV before there was MTV.
Yeah.
They couldn't appear on 100 shows to promote their record. So they did movies. We didn't call them videos in those days. They were promo reels of their songs. And Paperback Writer and Rain were filmed in Chiswick Park. And we go right to Chiswick Park. We go to the place where the Rain video was actually, if you Google the song, or if you go on YouTube, you'll see we go to that park. And that's our first stop on the Beatles tour. So people love that song, Rain. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, it's one of the first things, one of the memories. It's the great thing about, I know I talk about my mother a lot, but she's the one that really got me to appreciate a lot of music, different styles of music.
Yeah.
But not only were the Beatles making these movies, we'll call them promo reels, but they were kind of movie-ish.
Yes.
I mean, Elvis was doing the same thing too.
He was doing full-length. He was doing full-length movies. The Beatles were doing promo, for their individual songs. Yeah.
And something came to mind. I almost forgot. So no, there was the out of nowhere in reruns, at least when I was.
Yeah.
The cartoons.
Oh, the Beatle cartoons. You remember the Beatle cartoons. So that turned on a whole new generation to Beatle fans. Al Brodax was the head of King Features, which did a lot of animation. And the Beatles really had nothing to do with that. It wasn't their voices, but it was a great way to sell records. Kids love the songs. They'll buy the records. And it was very brilliant. and I love them. I hope they're re-released someday. They're due for a nice 4K transfer and all that. But yeah, the Beatles, weren't big fans of the cartoons, but the fans themselves loved them. Oh my gosh, yeah, I brought a smile to my face. You just mentioning the Beatle cartoons.
Yeah, and you're right about like reintroducing a younger generation to the band because I believe it was in the early to mid '80s when I don't know what cable channel was doing this or a local station where they were started doing the reruns of the Monkees.
Yeah.
And not long after that, I think they had some sort of a late '80s reunion, maybe.
Well, yeah, sure. The MTV just went monkey crazy with Monkey Weekends and all that, and they came back. They were the hottest selling tour of '86, '87 because of being back on TV and being in the public eye again. Yeah.
Yeah, and at that time, again, the metal guy, but I was a low-key Monkees fan too. But and I love Davy Jones. You can't be in a bad mood listening to the Monkees. It's almost I dare you. It's impossible.
I agree. It's just happy. It's happy music. Come on. People take things too seriously. Yeah, of course, Pink Floyd and Zeppelin. I mean, yeah, of course that's stuff that you appreciate more, maybe, better musicianship, but, just want to have fun. Put on, oh, I could hide neath the wings of a bluebird as she sings. It's fun.
It is. And so let me ask you this now. I mentioned earlier, we are in the today. People are still talking about the Beatles.
Yeah.
And before we get to that part of it, when is this next convention coming up?
Oh, right. Very soon. May 17th. It's not a convention as much as it is a festival. I'll tell you, when I did the conventions, they were 3-day events. I would try to get in major guests, John Lennon's first wife, members of Badfinger, relatives of the Beatles, really, really, huge signing guests, John Lennon's sister, Paul McCartney's stepmom, Pete Best, the Beatles' first drummer. That was my goal, was always to get great guests. And then we'd have 50, 60, 70 vendors, all the memorabilia, the records. It was over the top. And then there'd be one band. And they would be the official band, and they would play all 3 days. Now it did a flip. It's about the music now. We have 8 bands. We've had as many as 10 in the past. 8 bands, a handful of vendors. Maybe I'll have a guest, a few authors. And it's, whereas I used to charge, in the day I would charge $20, $25. It's $10 to get in. And it's at a brewery. So you can hang out, you can chill, you can have food, you can have some ales. It's a really great, great vibe. And it's May 17th in Windsor, Connecticut, which is kind of close to the Massachusetts border. Dudley Town Brewing Company, a great, great location, great people there. We did a psychic fair there before. Love them. They loved us. So we're returning with a psychic fair in July, but we're doing the Fab 4 Music Festival. And if people want information, that's the website, www.fab4, the number 4, not spelled out, fab4musicfestival.com.
Awesome. And I know it's going to be great because you're involved. You're a master of ceremonies with these things. And before we go, I got a couple of things I'm going to ask you because I think that not many people, I didn't even know till the other day. I'm not going to lie because I did some internet trolling, not on you.
Yes.
I'm talking about Beatles. And then I'm talking about, well, I love Elvis too, right?
Yes.
So for the life of me, it's like, did they ever meet? And then I said the answer is yes. I think it was in 1965.
They did, and there was only, aside from Elvis and his clan, the Elvis Mafia, there was the 4 Beatles, their road manager Mal Evans, their one of their reporters, a journalist, a good friend of mine, Ivor Davies, who's still alive. And they met not at Graceland, which I always thought was where they would have met, but in California at his home. And, I wish more than anything else that there was footage of that, right? How amazing would that be? There should be a movie of just that with a reenactment of them meeting and whatever led up to it and all that stuff. I'll tell you, they met, and it was it's historic. They met just once.
They did, and according to the article I read, that there was an agreement made. I think it was the Colonel himself, Tom Parker, and the Beatles manager. No recording, no
Yes.
video of anything. Which is a damn shame for guys like us that really would have want to see something like that.
Oh
But
my God.
I wonder why that is. Is there because? What do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the Colonel Parker was very, very controlling, and he would never have wanted Elvis to be seen without the professionalism that he, insisted on Elvis. Dressed properly, hair perfectly in place, the set list, the producers, the stylist, the makeup guy, and this was, before we ever had. Unplugged. This is before we had behind the scenes or acoustic storyteller shows. Putting these guys together, you don't know what you're going to get, but no one understood posterity and history, and unfortunately we'll never know and never have that. And yeah, damn, I would love to. I think maybe that's the one thing in the world that pop culture would there's maybe two things, but I think one of them came out, the Jerry Lewis clown movie that was supposedly hidden all these years. I think just recently came out. I'm not sure, but that's because there was footage of that. There was a film called London After Midnight, which was the Lon Chaney Senior's black and white silent vampire movie, which has never come out, and it's a lost film. But those were made, those were prints, those were actually in the world. We're talking about something that no one even had a little 8mm camera or their tape recorder going, but apparently they jammed on some songs, and Elvis put on the bass, and wow, it would have been something for the ages, right?
Yes, and if there's even any existing film or video on that, it's probably right there with the Temple of Doom in the basement in the Smithsonian, along with the with the Ark of the Covenant, because that's some piece of history right there.
There isn't. It would be known. It would have come out, and someone would have made $1 million on it already.
True story on that. And before we leave, I'm going to ask one thing, because I know that with all great things always come to an end, especially with the Beatles. A lot of controversy. We're not going to get too much into it, but I got two questions on that.
We'll do that for the next
And
one.
then, is it fair to blame Yoko Ono for the breakup of this band? And the second part to that question is, what's your favorite Yoko Ono song?
Whoa! Stop it. All right, I'll answer the first one. The second one is on Double Fantasy, and it's her ripoff of Making Whoopee. But did she break up the Beatles? She contributed to it. It would have happened anyway. Is there one reason why a couple divorces? Is there one reason why, the original members of KISS couldn't stay together? There's never one reason. There's usually, a spouse that is controlling and has some influence. But I think they had to outgrow each other, and it would have a case of moving on. They had different ideas for who should manage the band after their original manager, Brian Epstein, died. And that, that contributed to a lot of the turmoil within. So does Yoko get credit for it? Some credit, not all the credit. And that's very funny. I'll let you give me your favorite Yoko song if you're going to put me on the spot like that. Come on.
It was I believe the song was called "Don't Worry."
All right. Well, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's good. All right. Yeah. Walking on Thin Ice is also one I actually love of hers. But anyway, thank you for letting me promote www.fab4musicfestival.com. If your listeners are Beatle nuts, or if they like celebrities, or they like top 10 lists, or they loved our little chat today, they can check out the book of top 10 Beatles lists on Amazon, where if you order it there, obviously you get, free shipping if you're Amazon Prime. Or if they want a signed copy, the website is www.fab. Oh, wait, no, I almost said Fab 4 Music Festival. Book of Top 10, and again, the number 10, not TEN. Book of Top 10 Beatles Lists.com.
Awesome, brother. It's a pleasure having you on the new show. And I know I'll be seeing you around soon, because you're doing Paracons, you're doing the Beatles festivals. I'm going to catch you down the road soon, and we're going to share some stories.
Yes, I can't wait till part 2 of this Beatles one, and then coming on again so we can talk about Paracon. I'm looking forward to it all.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
All content on this broadcast is a property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Bonus Overdrive Wednesday. The information shared on Bonus Overdrive Wednesday is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.